Hi guys, Goffy here and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be talking about another Viltrox lens. Recently I reviewed the Viltrox 77mm F1.2 and since reviewing that lens lots of you reached out and told me there might actually be another Viltrox lens that is a little bit better. So in today's video we're going to be checking out the 75mm F1.2. It's a lens that's been out for a little while now, I'm a little late to the party, but is it as good as that 27mm? We're going to find out in today's video. For full disclosure, as always, Viltrox have sent me this lens for free in exchange for a video. They have no influence over what I'm allowed to say, so I can say what I want about the lens, so I am going to give my own opinions throughout. But let's just get cracking. I think we'll start off with F1.2, because I think that's what most people are going to be buying this lens for, seeing how it performs wide open. Once you've actually unboxed the lens, there is a #1 rule. Once you connect that lens to your camera, the first image should be of your family pet. If it's not, I think you're probably doing it wrong. So with the camera locked out to F1.2, some treats in hand, we went and took some pictures of my dog, Max. Now something I noticed looking at these images shot at F1.2 is the fact that the XH2S has missed focus a few times. I think this is actually more to do with animal eye autofocus than anything else, because with Max the dog, it definitely struggled, but then doing portraits with Claire later in the day, the XH2S nailed it every single time. Now the depth of field is super shallow, especially if you're shooting close up with this lens, so it's definitely something to bear in mind if you're doing animal photography and you think you're going to use F1.2 and be reasonably close at times, it might be a bit of a struggle, and I think even using manual focus might be just as hard as well. I will say one thing that really stood out with my use of this lens, and that is the fact that 75mm on a crop sensor, which I think is around 110mm on a full frame camera, just feels so long. I'm somebody who absolutely loves the 28mm full frame equivalent, so having something that is 110mm felt really unwieldy, and I personally really struggled to get used to it. If we ignore the animal autofocus then and just look at other things about shooting F1.2, the sharpness of this lens does match that 27mm F1.2. Wide open, this lens is actually really sharp. You can see on this image of a signpost that I took, you can see that the lettering of the signpost is sharp, and you can also see that the spiderweb as well is super easy to see. I think this is super impressive for a lens like this, especially third-party ones. A lot of them fall down wide open, but Viltrox really have done a great job here. Even at the close focusing distance as well, with this sign, we're about the close focusing distance of, I think it's 88 centimeters. The sharpness is still really good. I mentioned it a little bit earlier, if you are shooting at the close focusing distance of 88 centimeters, your depth of field is so shallow. Here's an example here of a photo of a bee, and well, you'll have to believe me that it's a bee because I accidentally focused on the flower just underneath it, and you can barely see the bee because it's so out of focus. When it comes to the bokeh of this lens, this is what it looks like at different apertures. You can see the bokeh balls aren't perfectly round and there is a bit of like a swirly effect to it. I personally quite like that swirly effect. It adds a little bit of character. We're going to talk about character a little bit in a minute. Character often means imperfections, but I kind of like how it looks. Now the next thing you're either going to love or you're going to hate, and that is the fact that this lens flares pretty badly. I asked a question over on Instagram the other week that said, do you like lenses that flare or would you prefer a lens that never flares? And interestingly, the majority of you come back and said that you do like lenses that flare. I think importantly, it kind of comes down to control and how easy is it to control that flaring if you want to. Now with this Viltrox lens, some of the images that I took, like these ones of Max, I think actually look quite nice because of the flares in them. And this is where you might argue that this lens has a bit of character. But when we say character, we are generally talking about imperfections. In other scenarios, like these images of Claire where she was backlit, the flaring was so out of control and I just couldn't control it. I do think flaring in this situation has ruined the images. I want to quickly interrupt this video and just talk to you about some statistics real quick. Like, look at this one. This one shows me that lots of you return to watch my videos, but you don't click that subscribe button. So if you are a returning viewer and you're part of this statistic, please consider hitting subscribe. It really does help support the channel. Now we've touched on the performance then, let's quickly loop back round to build and design. The lens itself feels really nice and solid. It feels very much like that 27mm F1.2. It feels different to a Fuji lens, but it still feels like it's made to the same standard. The aperture ring on this 75mm doesn't feel the same as that 27mm. I actually prefer the 27mm on this front. I feel like on the 27mm it's got more of like a dampened feel to it, and on this lens it's far more clicky and maybe just feels a little bit less precise. This lens is also weather sealed. You can see the seals around the mounts, so that is also a good thing for me. I really don't like it now if a lens isn't weather sealed. I've kind of moved everything over to weather sealed, my cameras, my lenses, and having like a non-weather sealed lens in my collection does sometimes feel a little bit odd. But this lens has weather sealing. Now this lens does have one slightly bizarre feature for a Fujifilm camera, and that is the manual focus autofocus switch on the lens. Now I think what's happening here is Viltrox make one lens and provide it in different mounts. So for some other systems, maybe Nikon or Canon, they need that switch on the side. But for us as Fuji shooters, where we normally have that on the camera, it is a little bit odd and it does behave a little bit weirdly too. Turning this autofocus manual focus switch into manual focus basically stops the camera being able to communicate with the lens. So if your camera was already in autofocus, it's still in autofocus. But now when you press the button on the camera, nothing pops up. Then if you change it back into autofocus, the button on the camera now works. The behavior's a little bit weird. I think you'd get used to it over the long term. For me personally, where I'm never going to manual focus the camera, I would permanently leave it on AF and just never change it. But if you're someone who thinks you might use manual focus, kind of the behavior might feel a little bit weird. It's not a big deal for many, but if you're someone who thinks they're going to manual focus this lens, then maybe it will become something that you need to get used to. If you're wondering what all the little numbers mean down at the bottom of the images, that links to my stackable preset collection. This is an example here. You take the raw, apply basic adjustment 4 and then tone curve 7, and you end up with this image. If you want a little bit more information about them, there's a link down in the description. So overall then, what's this lens actually like to use? Now I think the big thing that stands out is the fact it is a big chunky lens, and I think we should expect that to some extent. At the end of the day, this is a 75mm f1.2 lens that performs well as well, and I think we have to accept the size to some extent. I think the thing that stands out for me personally is I, during this kind of review period, used it a lot in kind of casual settings. We did like a 6-mile round trip to a pub and back, and I used this lens and it felt super excessive. Carrying around a massive 75mm f1.2 just felt a little bit ridiculous. But at the end of the day, this lens doesn't say casual shooting on the side of it, it says pro. And I think this is probably where this lens makes the most sense. When you're in a professional setting, most of the time, I don't think you really care about the weight and size. If you're shooting a wedding, you probably don't really care if the lens weighs a few more grams than normal. And the autofocus for me personally, I thought was more than good enough. On the XH2S, it was nailing eye autofocus for portraits. For animal autofocus, f1.2 was a little bit sketchy. I think if you had an animal that had a bit more contrasty eyes than Max, I think it might help, but where he's got really dark eyes, the camera definitely struggled to focus. I think another thing to consider with this lens is there's not really an alternative. It actually sits in a really nice place, and I like this about what Viltrox are doing here. They've made a unique lens that doesn't just copy everything else. There's lots of brands out there making 23mm and 33mm, but this 75mm f1.2 kind of sits on its own. You've got the 56mm f1.2, which is a great Fuji lens, but there's quite a big difference between 56mm and 75. And then the other way as well, you've got the Fuji 90mm f2. It's slower but a bit longer. It kind of sits in the middle, and it's a really interesting lens that doesn't really have a direct competitor. If you've got any questions about the lens though, let me know down in the comments and I'll do my best to get back to you. And if you've enjoyed this video, as always, please do not forget to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Cheers!